Hey everyone, this is mikevizneros. I'm here with Layla Mannheim, who's just released her latest visualization to Tableau Public, and it's called It's a quantified self-viz. It's an analysis of her own speech patterns during the presentation that she gave at the October 2018 Tableau conference. The presentation was entitled Metaphorically Vizzing, and she looked into how many times she used her own personal verbal crutch word, and did a bunch of analyses in the context of how her presentation was flowing. The final published version of has been released. It's been well received by the community. And in my opinion, it is a beautiful and informative look at those patterns. It is a pretty good way to show the flow of Layla's speech, both across the presentation and moment to moment within the presentation. It's a strong design. It's eye-catching. It shows a lot of complex concepts in an easy to understand way. Holds together as a static viz, rewards user interaction. It's just really well put together as a whole. But the final version of the viz is not the first version of that Layla shared with me. We often look to each other for input on visualizations while we're still in the process of developing them. And what we mean by that is we want to put our work through genuine structured design critiques because that helps us to create the best possible final product. And we trust one another to be able to provide that kind of critique for each other. So for we decided to record the critique so that other people could see it and could see what it looks like when we review each other's work. And in this case, obviously it was me reviewing Layla's draft version, but it could be the other direction as well. So we did the design critique for about a week before Layla published the final version, and the recording of that critique is available for you to watch in its entirety. But today, what we want to talk about is how the final version of differed from the draft version that Layla presented during the design critique. And we also want to talk about what role the critique played in getting this viz to its final published version. So, Layla, hello, congratulations, and it's good to talk to you again.
Thanks, it's great talking to you too. And thank you again for doing this kind of live. I think a lot of times before we've done it a little bit with a lag with kind of Twitter messaging or other digital communication forms. So I think even more than usual, kind of sitting down for a good hour and looking at this together more interactively, I think really helped to push this design and push myself on this one.
That's awesome to hear. So let's actually get into it a little bit. Let's start by talking about what is it that you think changed the most from the version that you showed me to the version that you published as a final version?
Sure, so let me just share my screen.
Okay.
And just for my own reference. So I think thinking about this question, it really struck me that a lot definitely changed, but also a lot of the core things didn't change. So I think we talked about how it was really maybe the most useful to myself get a better understanding. And really, so I had a bit of an understanding in my head what was important to me, but to really be forced to say it out loud really helped a lot. But what you can see that has changed most is probably this top area. So,
so the design you're talking about.
The design,
okay.
But a lot of it is driven by also the content of it. It's not just designed from an aesthetic perspective, but
right.
On the aesthetic side of things, I guess they're just moving up the title and the subtitle here. So the and this kind of subtitle, I think definitely changed the look a lot in the structure and flow. And then of course the area at the top, which was more discreet and more kind of echoed before it more echoed what was on the bottom here. So now it really it changed to doing the rate per minute rather than, keeping it at the discrete slides. And also changing the visual form to an area chart, I think really does help to set it apart and improve the overall flow of the viz.
Right, because we talked about readability, we talked about the color and the layout, we talked about the actual analysis that you were doing and a bunch of the different elements. And you think that at the end of the process, it was figuring out what the analysis was showing, or what, or figuring out a better way to clarify the analysis. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so I think it really clarified for me that the three kind of most important things for myself to do, or kind of like my three top goals for this, was first to show kind of how the rate changed overall, and how when I got more towards the end, when I got more tired, the rate increased.
Right.
And so switching this to an area chart and to showing it not by slide but actually by minute, like I changed it to a rolling average, to like the change over from the beginning based on a 5-minute moving average. I think that really helps to accentuate that, and having this as an area chart and like a block of color also helps to draw the eye first to that. And so that was important because that was like my number one kind of priority for the viz. And then the second priority was like figuring out, showing when the occurred in each of the like in each of the slides. And so we talked before about that, how I really felt that that's why it was important to show it like this in the form of this chart.
Right.
And then the third priority was kind of how the pace of slides changed. So this main chart really helps with both of those two. Both like how the pace overall changes from the really longer slides and back up to the shorter ones, and also showing the like where the occurred in each of the slides. So I think the redesign really helps to draw the eye first to the top, my kind of top priority,
Mm-hmm.
and then also kind of de-emphasize this chart that's not quite as important, that's more of like a secondary, I think helped. And along with some other kind of minor formatting changes on the bottom, it really helps to draw the eye more to the story that I wanted to focus on.
Right. The area chart that you have at the top is now like the sort of the overall strategic, like big picture story of in your presentation. And so that's what your eye goes to first now. And before, it was this Pareto chart on the right-hand side, which was actually the heaviest element, but is the least important element of the three that we are distinguishing among.
Right.
The top part, the area chart, was a lollipop chart before, and you sort of kept that in a very faded version to show the 5-minute counts.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like a flag. It actually looks like a flag to show you at this point we're doing this many and this many So
yeah.
but you made it distinct from the charts at the bottom, and that was one of the things we talked about, was that it was harder to distinguish the top from the bottom. Now it's very easy to distinguish the top and bottom. So
part of why I did that is I realized minute to minute there isn't a huge change. So you could see it started about 7 ohms per minute, and at the end I was at like 13, or at the highest point I was at like 14 is an average.
Right.
So it's not like a huge change, although I think in order for that to be because it's a moving average, it's definitely like a consistent change in my my rate.
Right.
But I just looking at this data, I realized that by when you summed up the 5-minute like total ums in every 5 minutes, that's where it was easier to see the difference. But I still like I like the idea of showing. I thought breaking it up by 5 minutes was a little too discreet.
Right.
Because if you think about like a 5 minute span in a presentation, that really is huge.
Mm-hmm.
A lot can change in 5 minutes.
Sure.
And
right. And every 5 minute chunk is going to be different from a 5 minute chunk 20 minutes later in your presentation. Your flow is different.
And that's why I also added a little bit of annotation.
Yeah.
As I mentioned before, annotations are not I move these around more times than I would like to admit. I just always feel like they're in an awkward position and not quite where it's easy to understand like what they're pointing to.
Yeah, but, there's an element to putting those annotations in the right spot. It's almost like you have to be close to where they're referring to.
Yeah.
But it also can't be jammed up against something else. Like it has to be visually balanced as well as being accurate in position. So I do like that you have a much stronger title for rate, and then you have the explanation of what it is and how you measure it, because that was not prominent at all in the original version.
Yeah, that definitely changed. And I thought about doing an axis again, where to place it, I don't know. But I also
don't need the axis because you have the annotate or the labels.
Yeah. Yes.
Exactly. Again, you didn't have before.
A lot of what I added was also interaction, and I generally just add that at the end. So that was kind of it wouldn't have been in that at the stage when I shared it with you anyways. Mm-hmm. But I think it was really helpful to have a clearer understanding of what my top goals were in order to make the annotation that really supported that the most. You can see we talked about still having slides in the top area.
Yeah, can you show people what you're talking about? Because you're talking about as a Vision tooltip, right?
Yeah, so initially when it was a lollipop chart, one per slide, the Viz for tooltip tooltip that had the slide images was at the top. So I decided that really it might actually even be like better, like less mouse movement required if it was actually in each of the ums when you scroll over the ums, so you don't have to remember, what slide this was. As you go into the ums, you can see the slide image and when the occurred. But initially, you talked about maybe having the ums overlaid on here, so you could still see kind of where each slide started on the true timeline. But what I realized is that you could still see kind of where it lines up on over here. And then I also added the highlight, and this is actually, I think, the part that came out really interesting, because you can see in a given minute that's not always going to line up. So you could see, like in this minute, for example, there was one in the from the last slide here.
Yeah.
But you can also see, lost that one now. But you can also see kind of how if there were multiple slides in 1 minute, kind of how that flowed.
Yeah, there's a lot of good highlighting actions in this, because you have it highlighted from the top, you have it highlighted from the side on your Pareto chart. It was,
on a technical, just part of this was, I always look at public viz as a great chance to test out or kind of learn some new features. And so, of course, the rage right now is the set actions. And so part of why I did these 5-minute things is I added this where you can kind of highlight because bins, I think, are a little hard to visually understand. Right, so these are based on 5-minute bins. So when you like that, this spin is really actually the minutes from here to here.
Right.
So that's why I added that.
Yeah, when we did our design review or design critique, we did not talk about the way you achieved certain things technically at all. That wasn't a thing that you asked for feedback on, so it wasn't a thing that we discussed. We only talked about it if it happened to come up during the conversation. Like you mentioned that the bottom sheet was actually 5 transparent sheets laid on top of one another, which was cool, but it wasn't a thing that I needed to give you any feedback on. So like the way that you're accomplishing these things are really interesting to me, but certainly not a thing that you need any feedback on because you're doing them fine on your own.
Yeah, and I think a design review shouldn't, like I don't need that from a design review. You know what I mean?
Some people might want that from a design review, but you don't. And so we didn't include it. And actually, that leads me to a couple of the other things that I wanted to talk about, which was, and we got into some of it, which is there were other things that we talked about changing or that we could have changed or you could have changed that you ultimately left the same. And like the most of the bottom chart falls into that category.
Yeah.
Was there anything else that you remember us talking about that you decided, yeah, I don't really need to make that change, or that's not important to me, or whatever?
So I did think of, or I did experiment a little with adding the sections because, you know, I definitely had like, you know, my first section was how do you define a metaphor? If you look in my slides, it's these.
You mean like they're a thematic?
It's like these slides. This was like my kind of PowerPoint sections, and that's how I kind of outlined and organized my talk. So I thought it might be interesting to look at it that way, and I thought maybe there was perhaps some patterns in terms of towards the end of a section or in the beginning of a section I went faster. Maybe that's when all these really, you know, short slides happen. So I think there's some interesting patterns with that, but I found, so I kind of experimented with adding like basically additional annotations and kind of reference lines here. And I felt like it was too cluttered, really. And part of, I think there were some of the patterns in the longer slides, the pacing, where I slow down and maybe have more ums, weren't all related to transitions. So I really wanted to have the focus be more on like exploration and hoping that the visual is interesting enough and knowing what it means, knowing how you could really see areas where it's increasing, the rate is increasing or decreasing, that would cause curiosity and actually encourage people to play more and explore more. So that was kind of that.
Yeah, I guess those are the sorts of things that are analyses that you might want to do, but that would be hard to convey all in one viz. So you're sort of focusing on the most important messages or not including all the things that might be of interest to you, or that if you got really down into it, you could pluck out some insights for yourself, but not worth adding more clutter into the viz.
Right. Exactly.
So there are also some things in here that changed that we didn't talk about. Or at least I'm pretty sure there are, because I don't remember talking about adding the rate or adding a shadow behind the area chart or adding flags. So
yeah. So for example, the shadow, I thought that it went well with a whole kind of very, I guess more of a dramatic, we almost call it sharp design aesthetic. But it initially came from the fact that I don't know how much you use area charts, but one of the things that drives me crazy about it is that the end of it It looks weird. And it doesn't have so if I want to have a border, I had a border, like basically like a line chart on that accentuated the top, so accentuated how it went up and down.
Right.
But it was just red on the side. So part of it was just, I could use a transparent sheet to tweak the border on the side.
Yeah.
And I just happened to lay it to, throw it out on the dashboard where it was a little offset. And I was like, okay, that looks cool. And it goes with the design. So, and then I also, because of some of the changes I made on the bottom chart, is I like to refer to this as you're saying, the kill your darlings. I definitely had to kill a lot of my darlings. And one of those was what I thought was a really cool way of using transparent sheets, was having like a white, like a true white copy of this line chart.
Yeah.
That kind of like worked kind of like a shadow highlight to accentuate or draw the eye a little more to a line chart that is very like lightly colored.
Yeah, it's almost a glow effect that you would put underneath it.
Yeah, exactly. But because I decided to change the background of this worksheet to a true white, it was kind of like a yellowish beige before. That obviously wouldn't work anymore. So I was, part of my reason why I decided to keep the shadow up here is because I did kind of fall in love a little bit with that usage of transparent sheets. So let me think about some other of the things that changed. So I will say one of the things that we didn't talk about specifically, but that I did end up moving, was this timeline. Moved it up. We had talked about just moving up the like title area, and I really like that idea. So I will say that is something I feel like was really great in the review, because I again, like I mentioned before, I was I think committed to it where it was by that point, which was down here. And so it was really great to have a fresh set of eyes and bring up an idea I would have never, kind of twist this structure around in a way I would have never, I wouldn't have thought of. And I really found that opened up a ton of design possibilities, and like where I was able to solve for a lot of things that I didn't like in the previous iteration. So I moved this subtitle up. I moved this, and and we talked about maybe having the M line up. I really ended up liking how the circle, like having the circle kind of cut into the subtitle a little.
Yeah.
That was really more of that kind of magazine feel. And it really helps to set off the top from the bottom, to have the circle start there.
Right. There were a lot of aesthetic choices you could have made in placing that title along the left. There were a lot of places that it would have made sense as a connection with your title. And I like the one that you chose. And I'm glad that you had a lot of options so that you could find one that worked really, really well.
Thank you. And I'll sideline this a little bit for a second, but I really, this was a little bit of another darling that I had to kill. Like I think this is a good position for this explanation, but I really loved how clean it looked without this, and how it really actually, not having any lines below that, really set off that whole kind of like design component of this chart, that it is kind of like its steps, and it really accentuated like when each of these kind of time records were made. But I like how it looks. I just think it also looked really cool without it.
Well, you know what, with the how to read part, the fact that you have it where the lines are diagonal, they sort of ape the how your slide times get longer and longer as you go from left to right. And then you have that same diagonal sort of mirrored a little bit in how you have the text justified, whether
Yeah,
it's intentional or a happy accident. I can't presume, but it helps to
it
emphasize
was
that.
it was another one of those happy accidents that where I didn't just accept it randomly. Like I saw it and I kind of thought through like, oh yeah, it really works because of that. So I'm happy that you noticed it. Yeah, but back to the timeline. Yeah, so I struggled with where when I saw I had the subtitle up here and I still had the timeline down here,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't know where to put this, um, you know,
Yeah.
presentation time, like the axis label. And yeah, all of a sudden I just realized, oh, why do I have this on the bottom and it's boxing in, this chart,
Mm-hmm.
kind of. So putting this up here really opened up the possibility of having more of those like purely vertical elements. I'm sorry, purely horizontal elements, kind of in the same area. And towards the end, I will say I added this white line here that separates because I used the chart. The area chart was at first just right over the red bar of
Mm-hmm.
the title because I thought it looked unusual and kind of cool. But the thing that just kept bugging me was how this part extended
Mm-hmm.
across, and it just looked weird. Even when I added the right, my husband will attest to this. I was just like staring at it, and I was like, there's something I don't like about it. I don't know what to do about it. But anyways, I decided to add a little separating white space, and I think that really helped.
Well, it works really well, and it gives that all of those choices together, like having all of your axes and your subtitle and anything that's a solid horizontal line in the middle. So that gives it a strong spine horizontally, and then all of the data flows up and down from it. And it feels a lot more balanced, and it feels a lot more open than it did when you were in your draft version of it, when
Yeah.
it felt much more boxed in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I will say, like, we talked about how part of this idea was this kind of more on the abstract end metaphor of a music score or
Mm-hmm.
musical notes. And I think part of what I liked about the design before was that it really looked like a musical, the terms better than me. But like it really looked like more like a musical score with a kind of black thing on the black horizontal on the top. But I think adding also kind of switching the secondary color here to a pink,
Yeah.
which most people who know me know I love pink. But that was one of the things that kind of like design breakthroughs that I messaged you about. That as soon as I tried pink, I was like, of course the solution is pink. How did I not know this?
Well, you were pretty committed to as you put it, your Bauhaus design of black, white, and red. So if you have to add one other color, you might as well just add a tint of
exactly.
red, and then you're done, instead of trying to figure out what else to do with it. So
right. Yeah, and as you can see, I mean, so I think part of the thing that really stood out for me from our design critiques. So the first I've already mentioned, which is the really clarifying for myself and focusing even more on those kind of most important things for me to show kind of like the goals of my design. But the second thing was really where the eye was being drawn, that I hadn't even noticed that the big color block here with the Pareto on the right was drawing the eye so much. And so obviously one of the first things I worked on was how to design it so that it was de-emphasized a little, but it really made me refocus on what I wanted to emphasize, what visual parts I wanted to emphasize, and what I wanted to de-emphasize. So a lot of like the detail formatting work I did was about really de-emphasizing a lot of the elements. So like it's a very small thing I don't know if we really talk about, is just taking these labels, and I think they were black before, either black or red.
They were, I think they were very strong black, but
yeah. And so having them in this kind of like more subordinate pink color, I think really, you can still definitely spot them, especially with the other design elements of those diagonals, really, making them like easy. It's like just a visual pattern that's easy for the eye to spot. But
right.
I think having that color really de-emphasizes them enough that the eye is more drawn to the red.
Well, it's perfect what you did, because you cared about those being labeled. You cared about showing that pattern of your longest slide keeps getting longer and longer as you go through, but it also wasn't the most important takeaway you wanted people to have, and it was the most obviously labeled thing in your draft version. So now it's visible, but it's not the most obvious thing. And I think that's a good revision.
Yeah, thank you.
So really now that we've gone through the viz and talked about the final version, let's finish up by talking about the actual critique process and see if there's anything that we did during this process that you think we could do better next time. Like, we didn't put any time constraints on it this time around, and we went way over an hour in our critique. Yeah. You could say, well, you could just take as much time as it takes, or as you know, towards the end, you accused me of getting giggly and starting to brainstorm. There's absolutely
Oh yeah, that was one of the things I did not take, the YouTube idea.
What is your opinion? We talked about leaving the white space. What is your opinion of embedding the viz there? Embedding the talk there?
Where? Oh, there?
Yeah. And that, because then every that you click on could jump to that spot in the talk.
Can you do that?
Yes.
So I haven't played around with that part of it. That would be.
It's just a flag that you add on to the end of the URL.
That's a possibility.
Hey, would you like to do a lot of extra work for beta?
So maybe the time boxing is the only thing. I was gonna say you're probably not gonna like the answer that I have, and that is that yes, I could see maybe kind of structuring it more with maybe having some set questions ahead of time might work, to have it be more focused, and maybe having kind of thinking about some of the questions ahead of time, like what is the purpose of my viz? But I don't know if it would have been as organic if we did that. I think part of the strength was that it was very much a conversation, and coming into the conversation without answers, in a sense. And I think I don't know that we would have, so selfishly, I don't know if the final product would look like this if we had been more structured about it. Well, we both came in with partial information. I came in with the idea of what kind of questions I was going to want to ask at the outset, and then keep talking based on whatever it was that your responses were. And you came in with knowing what your viz was, because I didn't know what it was and I hadn't seen it before. So neither of us had any kind of read ahead materials going into it. Yeah. So would it be more useful if we had that going for us beforehand, or did the surprise element of surprise, here's what it looks like, and surprise, here are the questions I'm going to ask, does that make it a more useful experience? For me, I think it was. Which being, especially with this viz, more, what is the word? Like first reaction. More aware of my ums. Yeah. I wonder if I had some idea of the questions and could have prepared a little more, if maybe I would have been more concise in my answers and not used as many ums. But like I said, I don't know if it would have been as organic, and I might have come to, like, I think figuring out what was important about the viz, and especially where we talked about why other people would be interested in looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm not sure that I would have come up with that exact answer on my own. And if I had come in with a different answer, I don't know if we would have talked it out and kind of thought about it together as much as we did.
Yeah.
I did think about maybe I wondered if it would have been better if you had seen the viz beforehand and could kind of digest it a little more. If you might have gotten other things, noticed other things or had other feedback. But then the other side of that is I really like the idea that it was your first time looking at it and being able to get your reaction as you're figuring it out. Like, I think you mentioned at one point that once you're already looking at it for an hour, you've been looking at it for an hour, so it's hard to have fresh eyes on it. I think there is something to that, being able to see the reaction of fresh eyes on the vids.
Sure. I liked being surprised by it. I wouldn't have wanted to have it be a read ahead. I liked that at the beginning, when you first showed it to me, there was about 5 or 10 minutes where you were talking through what you were showing and where the viz came from. And that gave me time to not only hear what you were saying, but also to watch or look at the viz and take it in a bunch of different ways and get comfortable with it. So by the time we actually started talking about it, I had a fair bit of time to experience it. So there was first reactions, and then there was, well, what questions are popping up in my head about it? And then we can get into the discussion. And to go back to something we were talking about before about time boxing, I was thinking that we don't have a lot of opportunity to take this kind of time to talk through our with somebody else. So a lot of the feedback that we get is instantaneous, or a lot of the feedback is, if not instantaneous, just short and brief and focused on one specific element. To have this kind of experience where you can sit down and talk for half an hour or 45 minutes or an hour or whatever it takes and really work through a lot of the deeper issues in the viz, I think is valuable and a different kind of feedback that we don't see a whole lot of. So I'm glad that we actually had the opportunity to do it.
Yeah, me too. So throwing back the question to you, is there anything you felt as a critiquer that you would have liked to change? And as being the next one up, is there anything as the person being critiqued that you feel like you'd rather do differently?
So I felt that I could have done a better job of keeping my discussion on track with what you were looking for. I feel like there were times when I veered too much into offering my personal preferences on things rather than just raising questions and trying to understand what you were going for and what you had considered and how to get you to the places that you wanted to go to, instead of just, like I said, especially towards the end, where it's like, oh, what if you did this? What if you did this? None of that has anything to do with what design critique is. That just has to do with backseat driving. And I could have done a better job of not incorporating that, because at the end of it all, it's yours. It's your viz and it's your vision and it's your story to tell. And my job as the person doing the critique is not to insert myself into the process. It's to help you clarify what you're thinking and figure out ways to get what you want to accomplish done. And that's what I would say.
Okay.
So I guess I have to come up with an idea for the next viz so that you can critique me.
Yes.
I don't have one just yet, but you'll be the first to know.
Okay.
So yeah, again, congratulations on putting out a viz that you are happy with and that seems to be well received.
Thank you. I'm very happy with it.
Awesome. I'm glad I could get to see it and help be a part of it.
Thanks, Wayne.